whenever you're small and you're growing, there's a tipping point where it does just get harder work, more work, more work, more work. And then whenever you make that mind shift or you hit a certain threshold where you can start to get the right people in your team, you're exponentially having an impact without you having to do it.
Welcome to a special edition episode of the Game Changing Attorney Podcast featuring the Select Firm of the Year award winner announced at the 2024 CRISP Game Changer Summit, Josh Nelson, CEO of Nelson Elder Care Law.
I love sales. I think sales is one of the most ego-driven things that I can do in my firm. It's immediately people saying, oh, thank you for fixing this problem. But I know that if I do that, that's probably the lowest use of my time right now.
I'm Michael Mogul, founder and CEO of CRISP, the nation's #1 law firm growth company. I've built my business through practice, not theory. CRISP started with just $500 to my name and has grown to over 8 figures in revenue over the last few years, earning a spot on the Inc. 500 list of the fastest growing private companies in America. Our approach has been to take everything we've learned about generating massive growth within our own organization and help the country's most ambitious and committed law firm owners do the same for theirs. In each episode of this podcast, I sit down with innovative market leaders from the legal industry and beyond to learn from those who thrive in the face of adversity, challenge the status quo, and define what it means to be a true game changer. I sat down with Josh to discuss why building a successful firm requires not just filling positions, but hiring the right people who align with your vision and culture, how turning personal interests into business opportunities can lead to meaningful and sustainable growth, and why true success is measured by the impact on clients and the community, not just financial achievements.
Once your house is paid off, once you really get to buy all the cool stuff that you want to buy, me as an owner, me as somebody who's driving the firm forward as the visionary, has to really look at beyond the dollars and about the impact.
That's coming up on the Game Changing Attorney Podcast. Before we begin today's episode, I want to remind you that we aren't beholden to any sponsors or run any ads on this podcast. This allows us to present all of our episodes raw and unfiltered. I'm not going to push any made-to-order meal services on you or try to save you any money on your car insurance. That being said, I have one small request. If you receive any value from this podcast, please give it a 5-star review. Pay the fee so we can keep this podcast free. All right, Josh, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
Excited to have you on. I know you have spoken on some of our stages. You've been with us for a long time. Congratulations. You got the Select Firm of the Year at the summit this past November. I want to take it back to the beginning. I know there's a lot we want to cover just in terms of how the firm has grown, lessons you've learned, but how'd you get started? I mean, from my understanding, you started in like tax law and financial consulting. Why the pivot to elder law?
Yeah, I was doing kind of the normal traditional finance accounting route back in college. At the time, I was actually working for a race team doing professional drifting nationwide. I took over 8 years to get through undergrad because I was out running around doing racing stuff. And my mom wanted me to do something else, finish my degree at least, right? Get that undergrad degree. And so she bet me that she could beat me on the LSAT, which is the entrance exam for law school. And she was a director of IT at Home Depot at the time, kind of well over $300,000 a year back in the early 2000s. She didn't need to do anything. She was just trying to motivate me. And I'll wager on most stuff. I'm competitive. And she beat me by a point. She did like the whole power scores test. And so then, of course, we had to like double down, right? It's like, okay, we're going to do this. I'm going to study for real. And both of us improved by 3 points. So she still beat me by a point. Felt horrible. But it was enough for us to get a scholarship to go to law school. And she was at a point in her life where my uncle was an attorney. My grandma lived in the same city. I'm going up there to Illinois to go to law school. And she was like, well, what do you think if I go too? And I was like, that's fine. Me and her have a great relationship. And so we went up to law school. We weren't in like the same classes. They have 2 different sections. They kept us separate. They didn't want us doing wonky stuff. But she worked for an elder law clinic up there, which really did everything for seniors. So property disputes, scams, personal injury stuff, everything. And she really liked it. It's a really rewarding practice area. I was going more for the money at the time. I said, okay, I'm in my 20s. I'm trying to figure out how to get paid. We just went through the 2008 financial crisis. That finance degree is about worth nothing. What do I do next? And so I started law school, show up at the first day of orientation. You're sitting in this big auditorium, and they give me the news that most solo attorneys make less than $40,000 a year. And I was like, uh-oh.
Wrong room.
I was making that before I came here. What am I going to do? And so I started looking and saying, okay, well, what parts of law can you make some money at? And so I did a master's in tax while I was in law school. It was crazy, where normally in law school you take 12 to 15 hours a semester. I had to get dean's approval from the law school and dean's approval from the accounting school to actually take between 25 and 30 a semester, because I didn't have an accounting degree, so I even had to take some remedial classes to catch up. And that's really how law school went. I passed a couple parts of the CPA exam while I was still in school. I test really well because I can retain information for short periods of time, and I use that to my advantage. I always joke with my mom, going back to law school in your 50s, the amount of studying she would have to do to retain information, and she's a brilliant woman. But just as you age, I think that learning and the retention gets harder. And so I could really kind of ease through it. It wasn't that bad. It was putting in the work, putting in the reps, like making sure you put the time in, and it all worked out. And then afterwards, I came back to Atlanta, worked at a tax clinic here out of Georgia State, really helping people fight the IRS. I loved that feeling of the David versus Goliath. We had some pretty crazy cases that we actually got to take to tax court, which you never get to do because most people can't afford it. But whenever you're working for a not-for-profit or you're on grant money, you can take a spouse who her husband had been filing fraudulent tax returns before he died, and the IRS is coming back and trying to say, hey, you signed these things, you're liable, and you can help protect what she has left. Because it's not that she just lost her husband, she also found out he'd been lying to her. He didn't have a successful business. He'd been writing off stuff that you can't write off. And the IRS is saying, okay, well, where's our money? That money's spent, it's gone. Or we had a mistaken identity case where a gentleman just had a very common name, and he got on the hook for about $500,000 of tax liability because he magically lived in the same apartment as a guy with the same first, middle, and last name as him before. Even whenever I took that case, I'm sitting down for the consultation and being like, okay, are we really doing this? And it turned out where after I investigated and got into it, the facts showed that he wasn't liable for it. And that gave you that kind of huge win right off the bat working for that like law school tax clinic, where I got some offers from like the big accounting firms. Accounting firms pay more than law firms do back then. There was a real influx of lawyers after the financial collapse. I think even right now we see law school admissions kind of going back up a little bit whenever times get uncertain. But my mom started her own firm because she worked for another firm for a while, and that guy kind of took advantage of her. They didn't have all the details of their contract in writing, and essentially she ended up fronting about $20,000 in marketing expenses, and the guy refused to reimburse her. So she did what a lot of our associates will do, and I was like, screw this, I'm throwing up my own shingle. And so she did, and she wanted me to come work with her. We have a family of entrepreneurs. It normally doesn't work well, and so I was like, no, first, you can't afford me. I'm making great money. Second, I don't know that we want to work together. And eventually, she'd had her firm open for about 3-4 months, and she sent me a tax question because a really well-known attorney that works with veterans benefits had put in writing that somebody needed to cash out their 401k to qualify for this veterans benefit that would pay them at the time about $20,000 a year. And she was like, this doesn't even seem right, but it's in writing. The guy has a great reputation. They came to me for a second opinion. Can you look at it? And it was a trash legal strategy. The guy would pay like $100,000 in taxes in year one to get $20,000 a year later. It's just not smart. And that's the problem, is sometimes whenever we go to somebody for advice, I think they're niched. They're just in this one area, and correctly to get the VA benefits, it was the right strategy. But to maximize assets or money, it was a horrible idea. And whenever I'm meeting with that guy, I find out that he's actually like a World War II pilot of this really cool plane called a P-51 Mustang, which is like the F-35 of World War II. It's just like the coolest of the Top Gun type era from World War II. And like even his son didn't know. I'm sitting there across a small, maybe like 30-inch round table, and like I'm looking at his discharge papers, and I see this guy's like a P-51 pilot, and his son didn't even know. And so I love history. I love World War II stuff, especially aviation. So I made friends with the guy. Clearly we didn't work with him because he didn't need an attorney to make him lose $100,000. But that was enough to kind of get my mom to say, hey, working in private practice for tax law isn't as rewarding as it was for the not-for-profit, because you're not really helping people. People can't arguably afford to go fight the IRS. It costs too much. So you're working for companies. What I was doing at the time was like fuel tax, which is extremely boring, travel all the time. You're arguing over which miles for which semi-trucks are in which states. It's pays really well, not the kind of life I wanted to live. And then I just got this really cool experience of helping this guy, kind of fanboying over him a little bit. I'm not into celebrities, but meeting like a really cool veteran, I was down for that. And so I came to work with her. And whenever I first started, I wasn't an attorney in the firm. I came in as like a marketer, kind of business development person, helping to build relationships with financial advisors, accountants. And that's what my background had already been with the racing, is kind of relationship building, getting people to give you money for sponsorships to go race and do something you love, carried over really well to being able to get people to help their clients by sending them over to us. Within 6 months, we broke production because we were a small firm. And whenever you put in the work, whenever you put in the time, the hours, and you do it effectively, the clients come. And then we didn't build production. So we broke production right away. Fix production, break it again, fix production, break it again. And I really enjoyed that. It was just going around and building relationships. And then we realized that some of the solutions that elder law attorneys were doing didn't really cover holistically what people needed. You'd get a power of attorney, you'd get a trust, but maybe you didn't get the full plan. People need to understand the Google-proof side of it. How do you have the hard conversations with your dad, who's kept his finances secret his whole life, and explain to him you want to help him? Well, most of people are going to say, I don't really know how to do that. And so helping people with that scripting, with those conversations, having ways that they can approach their family on how to help without it being like what I would call a nuclear option. It's not just, hey, we're taking all the power away from you. And I loved that. And so we did that for a couple of years. And then the clients just kept referring more clients. And it really turned into something where we built a heck of a business.
I love hearing about all the wins. I imagine during this period there were a number of challenges as well, right? So like looking back, maybe even in the early years, what were some of the biggest lessons that you learned along the way?
Don't just hire bodies. Whenever you're new to especially like a service industry, I came from like logistics essentially. We always ran small teams. There was always easy to hold accountability because everybody had the same passion, the same goals, but I didn't recognize that at the time. And so especially back then, we weren't paying well, just to be blunt. It was above minimum wage, but not by a whole lot. I really used like the Ray Kroc method of build the systems out so well, like that logistics background, that you could get the lowest level person in here to do that. And that worked for profitability. And it worked really well for probably the first 4 or 5 years. But we always had a lot of turnover. And so we were always, quote unquote, overstaffed because we knew that we were going to have turnover. But because you were paying so little, it didn't matter. You were still making profit. We had onboarding manuals and books and stuff like that. And so we could get somebody up to speed and producing value really quick. But you'd always have call outs. So like I dreaded most mornings. At like 7 a.m. every day, you'd have people texting you, I ain't going to make it. I ain't going to make it. And then the next day, you'd have people call out just because somebody called out the day before. They're like, I'm overstressed now. You're like, what the heck are we doing? And then I never mind at that time putting in the time. So people always say like, what was one of the biggest things that you would do differently? I don't know that I could go back to putting in those like 12, 14-hour days, working Saturdays. But at the time I could. I don't regret it, except for the things that I think I could have done smarter. I think that ego and pride were a big motivating factor, just to myself almost. Nobody was looking at me. Nobody knew who I was. But in my head, it was like, I can do this. And so just proving it to myself, putting in time rather than hiring the right people to do it. Having a bunch of people that make less than $10 an hour back then doing stuff, you always had to redo stuff. You always had to just work twice as hard compared to getting the right people in. I think that was a slow lesson for me to learn.
I want to talk about the I guess the evolution of the practice from like the early days to what it looks like today. Like, how would you describe that? Like, what's the kind of the present state of the practice in terms of number of attorneys, team size? What does it look like now?
Yeah, whenever we started, before I got there, it was my mom, my sister, and a lady that would come in part-time to do signings, because in Georgia, you needed 3 people to execute well. I came in whenever we were breaking production. We had to keep finding paralegals and stuff. With estate planning, elder law, a lot of your hires can be non-attorneys. And especially the way that we built it kind of in that like systematized process. Me and my mom were the only attorneys well over until $1 million in revenue. With estate planning attorneys, we were under the belief that it was hard to hire them, which of course now we know is absolutely false. But at the time, we didn't have the onboarding well enough for them. I think that I probably had some scarcity of the idea that they were going to go like hang their own shingle, because that's what I'd seen my mom do. Oh, they're going to get mad one day and then we're going to create a competitor, and thinking that we had some kind of secret sauce that they were going to steal. But at the end of the day, we grew a lot with administrative staff, a lot with paralegals. We had a really big change in the business whenever we started using non-attorney salespeople. That was a really controversial move back then. I think now it's pretty well accepted, but this was 8-9 years ago. And at the time, everybody thought nobody's going to buy a will or a trust from somebody that's not an attorney. How are they going to sell without giving out legal advice? This is unethical. All kinds of stuff that like the law field is often just a little bit slow to adapt to. But the way we justified that was, if we have an attorney sitting in that room and the person doesn't hire, then the people that do hire are subsidizing that consult that you gave away, the person that didn't hire. And that just never sat right with me. And then from a business owner's perspective, you get into the field of, yes, I can close better than any salesperson I've ever had, but I can't do it while I'm sitting here. I can't do it while I'm in Guatemala with my family. I have a 13-year-old daughter now that I missed a lot of her early years because I had the misunderstanding that if I could provide financially, everything else would work out. And I think that that's often where entrepreneurs and business owners go wrong. I come from a family where both my biological parents have been remarried and divorced multiple times. And you hear all this, oh, it's always about money. In their cases, it really wasn't, but we never talked about it as a family. And so I always just thought, like, I can keep this relationship going if I could just make enough money. I can provide for my kid. We can go on this, 1 vacation a year or 2 vacations a year, and the other 50 weeks, I'm going to be forgiven for. That's a lie. Your kids just want your time. They just want your attention. They want that guidance.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. How do you spend your time today?
Amazing. I got a great team right now. So it was really, really hard for me to bring on a personal assistant. I always thought that was just like a luxury or a spend that ate into profitability. I thought that having middle level managers, like the people that get those I'm calling out calls, was a waste of money. Like, we aren't going to be profitable if we do that. And that was all wrong. I mean, that was part of like the coaching and the development that I've done, is understanding that you can bring people on, and even if they're $10,000 a month, $120,000 a year, but they give you a 6x return on that money, you're still way better. Your life's so much easier. I mean, I don't want to be flippant and say that there's no problems, but the problems I have today are massively better problems to have than I did before.
So I want to dive into the people. I know you guys are much more intentional about the hiring that you do now. I'd love for you to just speak to, like, what's your process now when it comes to hiring, and then what about when you have people on the team that are essentially underperformers? How do you address it?
Yeah, so kind of in 3 main phases. I would say that we're in phase 3 of hiring, or kind of the hiring funnel for the business. Whenever we first started, like I said, one of the biggest mistakes we made is just, I need a body. Somebody sit at the front desk. Don't mess up. That never worked. We had a lady who hid a squirrel in our roof because her boyfriend was like a squirrel removal guy. I mean, just wild stuff. Being a business owner, you just get these things that nobody would believe. How would a key holder to your business come in and like plant a rodent in your business? The fee to get that removed was $500. Like in retrospect, you wish you would have just been like, hey, can I have $500? So we were really off base to start with. Then during COVID, we really had a come to Jesus kind of moment about culture. This is really where we never closed for COVID because our clientele, even though they were at super high risk, wanted to shake a hand before they were handing over like a $5,000 check. So even seniors, people in their 80s, 90s that are told, do not leave wherever you're at. They were like, I want to come work with you, but I ain't working with you unless I can meet you in person. I'm like, okay, let's do this. And so keeping people motivated whenever they could go get unemployment for 50 grand or whatever, and especially at that time, whenever our average was like less than $13 an hour, they could get more money on unemployment than they could working for me. And so then you always kind of in the back of your mind are wondering like, well, why are the people that are here? This is weird. The what's in it for them is inverse of showing up to work. We sat down with a couple people that had been with us for a couple of years and we said, hey, this doesn't feel right. This doesn't feel like we're working in the right direction. What do we need to change? And that's really whenever we started working with a coach to do personality testing. And so at Crisp, you guys have helped us with being able to do some testing to see how people process information, how they need communication, how they need to understand the what's in it for them aside from just a paycheck. And especially during COVID, everybody was saying, oh, it's so hard to hire right now. And we were in a breakout group and a lady mentioned, it's not hard to hire, you just need to be faster. And so Jessica has a great hiring funnel. And a lot of the pushback, especially back then, was that's going to take weeks. And the lady in my breakout group was like, well, what if you just made it take a couple days? And I said, wow, there's no way in hell I can do that. And so we hired a hiring manager. Like even whenever we were struggling a little bit with profitability, even whenever we're trying to be like, we need to spend on marketing, we need to spend on production, we brought on somebody who was just a hiring manager. And within weeks, it changed the business. I mean, immediately getting candidates in, because especially I think in the last couple of years, people feel so exhausted from applying to jobs, not hearing back. If you wait to hire until like you're kind of behind the eight ball, so to speak, it takes a long time to respond back to candidates. And by the time you respond back to them, they're like, oh, I'm working at this other firm. And you really don't want somebody that then will jump right away, right? Like if they just accepted a job at somewhere else, and then whenever you talk to them, they're like, but I'll come talk to you. That's kind of a deal breaker for me. Doesn't have much loyalty or integrity in my eyes. And so she did amazing things. She was only with us for about a year. And she ended up going and working for a cool nonprofit up in North Georgia. She loves hiking and being with her kids and stuff. And so she left to go do that. But before she did, she hired another hiring manager. And that person is Kim. And she's been with me for over 3 years now. And in that time frame, she's taken us into what I would call like kind of that third evolution. So not just having a good hiring funnel to make sure they're a fit and doing skills tests. I mean, just to be blunt, we hired one lady who'd been a paralegal for 10 years that couldn't use Word. We just did it. We assumed, we didn't test for it. And so that was a short engagement. And so whenever Kim came in, she really said like, what do we need to do here? And she did amazing things with staffing, ended up actually being promoted where she's my chief operating officer right now. She's created career paths for people. She's helped me understand that not everybody's career path means growth. So there are some people that just want to be a paralegal for life. There are some people that just want to be a salesperson and not a sales manager. It was really hard for me to comprehend that because in my mind, you're always getting better or you're dying. It's kind of like that Tony Robbins idea that you're either growing or decaying. And so she's a great balance for a lot of my weaknesses. And she's able to talk with people in a way that I struggle to talk with them. And so she's a great COO for me. But she's brought on a new hiring manager now that's able to have a what we call bench strength or kind of bank of employees. So we're not waiting until we need a paralegal or an attorney or a salesperson. We're forecasting really 24 months out what we anticipate needing. And then whenever somebody applies through the posts that are always up, she's building that relationship. She's building that rapport. She's getting them signed up in kind of our waiting system so that whenever we need it, we just go pluck out of it. So At the end of last year, I had to let 2 attorneys go within a 45-day period. Some things changed with one of them that went really toxic. The other one decided she wanted to follow him and start their own firm. A couple of years back, that would have been crazy. Under this new version, what I'm calling version 3, we replaced them in 4 days because we already had it lined up. Then we already had the onboarding. We already had the plan of coverage. So whenever they left, it wasn't that fear of who's going to do the work. It's, we got this. How do we set the person up for success that comes in? How do we learn the lessons from what happened in the past? One of the lessons we learned was just whenever we bring an attorney on, we have utilization standards, even though we don't do hourly billing. And a lot of times people that haven't worked in an office with utilization standards really struggle with that. And so we learned that lesson kind of the hard way, but because we have that hiring funnel and we have that bench strength, that kind of pool of candidates, because we're known as a good company to work for, it starts to attract more of those A players. And those A players are willing to kind of sit on the bench and wait a little bit until you have an opportunity. Where I guess before I always thought, oh man, if we don't hire them right now, but I'll tell you, if you hire people and you don't use them right away, if you have that excess capacity, even A players are going to get burned out so quick.
Yeah. How would you describe the culture of the firm today?
Million times different than it was. Like I said, whenever we first started, bad culture, everybody's just kind of a cog in the system. Started to change that after COVID, and I think since then has been really good, but it's intentional. It's making sure that you're treating people as people, how you communicate. What you communicate to one person might be long form, might be short form for somebody else. Even right now, we had an amazing event yesterday with nearly 100 people showing up for a presentation. 22-year-old marketing assistant scheduled it, ran it, did the presentation, did the handouts. And yesterday she put in a 13-hour day to make sure that was a success. And whenever I talk to colleagues, they're always like, oh, this younger generation doesn't want to work. They don't even want to come in the office, let alone they're not working past 4:30 or whatever, right? I mean, she was there till 9:30 last night, and the conversion rate on that was massive. So our average fee is over $5,000, and we're able to convert a significant part of that room. I mean, that's well over a 6-figure day for us because she's committed, because she has that passion. She's not doing it for the money. She's doing it because she knows the value in our vision and how we help families. And by being able to create a culture that focuses on that, she'll be handsomely rewarded for it. But the reason she does it isn't because she's like, oh, I'm going to get a little bonus here or an incentive here. It's because she feels like she's changing lives. And I think that's the biggest thing that we've done in culture is what's in it for them as far as the employees to go along with Josh's vision. Before we would say, hey, I want to go help 10,000 families. I want to go help 50,000 families. And I think the team would look at it as well, Josh just wants to be rich. But being able to really show them, here's what that is. Using storytelling as the team, the same way you do in marketing to your team internally, making sure that they understand. So many people in your team don't get to see the beginning to end result. Even doing that with salespeople increases their conversion rate. So if you kind of walk them through, hey, you brought on this family, here's how it went, here's what the result was. Hey, unfortunately, we got the bad news that, Mrs. Smith passed away. We talked with her husband, here's how it worked. And then your salesperson goes into the next meeting and they have that 100% confidence that what you do matters. They're going to close better.
Absolutely. Let's talk about the growth rate of the firm. I mean, it's you guys are a bit of an anomaly, right? Many elder law estate planning firms, I mean, most of them even crack $1 million in revenue, and you guys have far exceeded it. What do you attribute that to? I mean, aside from everything we've just talked about.
A big part of it's the team. Anything over $3 million, really $2.5 million, your team is going to be the thing that drives that. You can carry it on your back. You can work the long days until you get to that and kind of elder law estate planning. But if you want to go above that, you got to have a team. And I think it's inspiring that team. And then I think it's also not getting complacent yourself. I think one of the reasons that, firm owners get to $1 or $3 million and kind of flare out is because that first year that you get $1 million of personal income, or maybe you never even get to that, but you get that revenue number of $1 million, people kind of applaud that. I think the reality is that a lot of people at $1 million in revenue take home less than they would have ever imagined. Just because you got $1 million of revenue doesn't mean you're a millionaire.
Yeah, not even close.
And I think the other part of it is once your house is paid off, once you really get to buy all the cool stuff that you want to buy, me as an owner, me as somebody who's driving the firm forward as the visionary, has to really look at beyond the dollars and about the impact. Because you can only have so much cool stuff. You get a garage full of awesome cars and it's really cool, and then you go try and start it and the battery doesn't start because you haven't driven it in a year. But whenever you go see somebody out at dinner and they come up to your table and they're like, hey, you probably don't remember me, but I just want to let you know that whenever I was going through this horrible time with my dad, I couldn't have made it without you. And so unfortunately, as bad as it sounds, it's probably that ego still. It's probably still driving me. That's what I do it for, is that kind of feeling. There's nothing in the world you can buy that to me feels as good as somebody recognizing you with that kind of accolade. I think whenever you're running things wrong, you're afraid, right? You're at Costco, somebody's like, hey, Michael. You're like, oh, crap, who's that? And I think once you get the systems and the resources and you recognize that being bigger just isn't about the money, it's about the things that you can reinvest into the firm to give a better experience. We can bring in people that do education on insurance in a non-selling way. We can bring in people that give financial advice without having to sign up with them. I mean, we can do some really cool things for our clients today that we'd never be able to do. One of the best things we can do is we don't charge for follow-up phone calls. So like if you hire my firm, because we're big enough, because I have a big enough team, I can field those phone calls essentially for your whole life without ever having to charge you again. That's pretty wild whenever you think about most firms out there. You do your will, you do your trust. Hey, I got a question. Okay, that's going to be $250 consult. Like, what? I already paid you $5,000. Like, what's going on? And so I think with size and with scalability, some of those economies of scale, people don't recognize until you're there.
What would you say? I mean, today in present day, what are some of the biggest challenges, that you have now?
I think keeping the team motivated as the world changes. So keeping the spirits high, recognizing that not only the systems that got us here aren't the systems to get us to the next level. One of the things that hurts my ego super big is this year, we're taking it as kind of a rebuilding or foundational year. We've hit where we could do about $1 million in revenue a month, but our cost of acquisition is kind of climbing. So you can look at that and say, well, market penetration costs more. Or you can look at it and say, well, no, our offer sucks. The offer that got us 150 clients a month isn't going to be the offer that gets us 300 clients a month. What do we need in the office? What do we need as far as the team? And so that's what we're really focusing on this year. So traditionally, if we aren't growing 50% year over year, I see that as a failure. That's just kind of like my standard. We've been able to do that for over 10 years. So to take a year where we're not targeting that big of a growth was a lot of pushback from me to my leadership team. It's the kind of thing where I'm going to my leadership team and saying, those aren't mutually exclusive. Let's do both. And they're saying, you can do that, but you're going to lose profitability. You're going to end up with the revenue number you want, and you're not going to be profitable. And so that was something that I've acquiesced on. I still don't know that I buy into it 100%. I think it's the right choice, but that's probably my biggest problem right now is how do we build for that next level?
Revenue is really like a vanity metric, right?
Oh, 100%.
It's actually interesting just with your background, even being as a CPA, most CPAs are really looking for ways that we can, increase profitability, minimize the investment. And I know you've pushed in and made a lot of investments into the firm, which has not only grown revenue, but more importantly, profit over the years.
Well, and ease and efficiency.
Yeah.
So like the big buzzword right now is AI everything. Well, you can go build your own language model for $40,000, $50,000. That's going to do a lot of really cool stuff. But if you aren't of the size or you don't have cash ability to go do that, and you're going to get it from a third-party vendor that's like leasing it out to you, your ROI is going to be way lower. So we just did a language model that has like a voice AI that does some phone calls for us. And the technology in the last 8 months has come so far that we feel like we have to label it as a bot because people wouldn't know the difference. Like that's crazy because a year ago they were clunky. Now it's wild. But we were able to invest in that, and it's already on a run rate of producing $1 million of extra revenue for a $40,000 investment just over the course of the next year for after hours answering and calls, and it will be able to mold into some other really cool stuff over time. So I think one of the things that people don't recognize is whenever you're small and you're growing, there's a tipping point where it does just get harder work, more work, more work, more work. And then whenever you make that mind shift or you hit a certain threshold where you can start to get the right people in your team, you're exponentially having an impact without you having to do it. But then the problem is you got to take things off your plate that maybe you enjoyed or used to do or felt like, I can do. I love sales. I think sales is one of the most ego-driven things that I can do in my firm. It's immediately people saying, oh, thank you for fixing this problem. But I know that if I do that, that's probably the lowest use of my time right now.
Yeah.
I can go make things that guide the leadership. I can make things that, put us the vision so that my team of 40 plus people has security whenever the markets crash or whenever there's a new presidency or whatever little news story is freaking people out at the time. I want my team to know that we're safe. I want my team to know that they have a future with me. I think so many people are trying to use AI as a reduction in team, and I want to use it as a multiplier. And I think by having open and candid conversations with the team about that, they're less fearful. Where otherwise it seems like back in the 90s, whenever computers were coming on the scene and everybody was like, we're not going to have jobs. And then in reality, it's just, we're just tied to these computers and email. I love AI. I think it's going to be cool. I don't think it's going to replace everybody.
Absolutely not. I think it will replace the ones not using it.
I agree with that.
But it's without a doubt, I agree with you wholeheartedly that it is a major multiplier. So Josh, I want to talk a little bit, we were talking about this before we started recording, and just you being a car enthusiast, and that might even be an understatement. Where did this develop? I know you talked about being on the racing teams, and then how does that, hobby play out in your life today?
I've always liked mechanical stuff. So even as a kid, I was the one that mom and dad would come home and the alarm clock would be taken apart. Or I had a little John Deere riding tractor and I'd take it apart, or kind of that red Power Wheels Jeep, right? I just always loved it. And I used to love bicycling. I need to get back into it. I haven't been doing it like I need to, but the mechanical side of working with your hands and being able to see something created was always really cool. Whenever I was a teenager, I got the opportunity to run a business of my own where we did rockscapes, like building dry creek beds and stuff like that. You want to talk about hard work? That's hard work. Even at 18, you'd be exhausted. And that made enough money where I could start building little race cars, and I love classic cars like chopping tops. So you lower the roof down to make them look cool. And whenever I went to law school and whenever I was first starting the firm, I had to give some of that up just because I didn't have the time capacity. But now I have 15,000 square foot warehouse filled door to door, wall to wall with cars. Not all fancy cars. Some of them are, but some of them are just wild. So in Atlanta here, we're blessed to be able to have a thing called Caffeine and Octane, where every weekend almost you can go drive on a track for between $25 and $100. And so I got a couple of race cars that we go do that with. Actually, one of your keynote speakers that I met, Dre Norman, he does a lot with making sure kids and teens and people with addiction issues are on track to really succeed in life. And so I'm working with him right now to be able to get groups of people to come out and learn how to drive these cars on the racetrack, really looking at how do I take my passion for things and make not only cool stuff, but how do we utilize it? How do I give the experiences to other people? But it's an absolute blast. If I have free time, that's where it's at. I'm at the shop, still welding, still coming home with a unibrow of black dirt across my face. One of the things I hope I never lose in life is the ability to put in hard work in the heat and get dirty.
Which in that warehouse, which one's your favorite?
I have an Ariel Atom, which is a little supercharged go-kart. That's my daughter's absolute favorite. It looks like you should not have a license plate on it. For me, I have what's called a Lotus 7, which is a old sports car from the 1950s that only weighs 1,000 pounds, less than 1,100 pounds with gas in it. And it has a Honda S2000 motor in it. And so it just flies. It only makes about 200 horsepower, but it's lightning quick and super fun. A lot of times, especially here in Georgia, you can go up to North Georgia and drive around through the mountain roads and do curated things. I'm part of a group called Smokies GT, which is a Porsche club that raises money for cystic fibrosis. Last year, just that Porsche Club brought in over $5 million for cystic fibrosis research, which to me is a huge cause. I don't have anybody personally affected with it, but hearing those stories and actually seeing where you can donate money to kids that is extending and doubling their life expectancy right away. So in the last 3 years that we've been working with the CF Foundation, they've been able to take children that were probably going to die between 16 and 20 and give them a good quality of life into their 30s just by giving them these like compression vests that allow them to really extend their muscles, and some new drugs that have actually come out as well. And so to be able to talk to somebody that was told as a child, you're not going to make it past a teenager. Usually kids with CF are really, really weak, really, really small for their size because they aren't processing oxygen appropriately, and see them grow in through puberty now and turn into strong, healthy guys is so cool. And so like we take them out and do car events and things like that, really build them with hope that there's a future. You know, if you're told as a kid that you're not going to live, you don't have that aspiration. And so to see somebody get that gift of hope back is life-changing.
I love it, man. As we come to a close, this being the Game Changing Attorney podcast, Josh, what does being a game changer mean to you?
Being a game changer to me is really designed by your impact. What can you do and take your strength, whatever that is, and multiply it, leverage it, turn it into value for the world so that the game really is changing.
I'm going to give a huge thank you to Josh for taking the time to join us on the Game Changing Attorney podcast, and I want to congratulate you once again for winning the coveted Select Firm of the Year award at the 2024 CRISP Game Changers Summit. If you found this episode valuable, here are 3 free ways that I can help you grow your law firm. Number 1, download the first chapter of my book absolutely free at GameChangingAttorney.com. Number 2, you can shoot me a text at 404-531-7691 and I'll answer any question that you've got for me. And finally, number 3, if you can leave this podcast a 5-star review, it'll help us gain access to more influential thought leaders and bring their lessons learned here to you. For more information on our interview with Josh Nelson, see the show notes for this episode in your podcast app or visit legalpodcast.com.